What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, the 8th and perhaps final installment in the Mission Impossible franchise, of course starring Tom Cruise. This is the 4th film directed by Chris McQuarrie, also co-written by McQuarrie. And yeah, there's so much to get into, of course, with this film and what it represents, but if you remember, this film at one point was titled Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 2 because it was the direct sequel to 2023's Dead Reckoning, previously Dead Reckoning Part 1. And yeah, now Mission Impossible franchise has been tasked with trying to tie up loose ends and directly conclude a story it's set up previously. And there's a lot of things that work and don't work in The Final Reckoning. I, of course, am a massive fan of the franchise. I think when you think about Mission Impossible, of course, there's very much the before and after Ghost Protocol timing when you think about the franchise, where, of course, 2011's Ghost Protocol from Brad Bird with McQuarrie becoming involved with the franchise at that time. That's where the really level up happened. And then once McQuarrie got involved with Rogue Nation and brought us to the franchise apex with 2018's Mission Impossible Fallout, we were almost like better than ever with this kind of stuff. And I think there's a lot of reverence and respect for Mission Impossible because, at its core, it's been the Tom Cruise vehicle, but this sheer audaciousness and over-the-top outlandish stunts and plots that we've gotten with Tom Cruise so earnestly communicating across this franchise, there's just a lot. I think there's so much indelible stuff to it, and of course, the stunt quality has been tremendous, and they've been able to level up these movies over the years. Again, once that Ghost Protocol demarcation point happened, and it's just been, one of the greatest action franchises of all time. It's just undeniable at this point. And now we're tasked with trying to wrap this thing up. Whether this ends up being the final Mission Impossible film or not, I'll talk about at the end. But yeah, this is certainly a monumental movie. The Final Reckoning also will be pretty interesting from a box office perspective because if you remember, when Dead Reckoning came out, it underperformed at the box office. It got swallowed up by Barbenheimer and lost its IMAX screens and never really got them back from Oppenheimer once Oppenheimer came out. So Final Reckoning, I think, also has a lot to prove in terms of the long-term viability of this franchise if they were ever to make another one again. Of course, Tom Cruise is now, I believe, turning 63. He was in his early 60s when they made this movie. We're getting past the point of no return, you would think. But then again, Harrison Ford was quite old when they made Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, so never say never. But it does feel like Mission Impossible is at least going to take some sort of break with no film in any form of pre-production and certainly nothing planned or scheduled right now. It does seem like Tom Cruise, with his other projects he's attached to, will be looking elsewhere, and Christopher McQuarrie, for the first time in a decade, will actually be making a different movie. And I think that's actually welcome. Chris McQuarrie has really proven himself to be an excellent director with his run with Mission Impossible, after, of course, previously being just a very celebrated screenwriter. Of course, the writer of Usual Suspects, one of the first people brought in to do work on Rogue One, pre-Tony Gilroy. Now he's also a A-list incredible director, so I'm very excited to see what he can do next. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is a lot of fun, but man, is it a messy, convoluted movie. As a big fan of this franchise, as big as you can be, even I'll admit that this movie has a lot to do. And when we're not spending time with some great set pieces, chief among them this really incredible and creative underwater submarine sequence, a lot of the plot mechanics and exposition is quite hard to follow. The film also has a lot of downer notes in the beginning. The Final Reckoning is tasked with concluding lots of threads and character arcs that previous Mission Impossible movies were not concerned with at all. This is the most serialized Mission Impossible movie of all. Of course, a direct sequel to Dead Reckoning, but also calling back to the first Mission Impossible movie very directly and also invoking stuff from Mission Impossible 3. That's just not something this franchise was really ever concerned with. Mission Impossible perhaps being a bit ahead of the curve with making artificial intelligence the ultimate villain of our time. That was fine, but the entity is kind of generic in its global domination pursuits, and Gabriel as the broker human aspect of that villainy is pretty bland and unexplored. We've never really watched this franchise for its villain, so it's not the biggest deal that I do think a lot of the stuff kind of falls a bit flat when you're on this globe-trotting scale, the way you truly are with the entity in terms of impending nuclear doom. If you think about the supporting cast in this movie as well, I mean, Haley Atwell just had so much more to do in the last movie. Same with Pom Klementieff. We get some good emotional beats with Ving Rhames and Simon Pegg, but I was actually surprised to see the film expand even further with even more new characters brought into the fold, like Tremel Tillman from Severance, Hannah Waddingham from Ted Lasso, bringing back Angela Bassett from Mission Impossible Fallout, making her the President of the United States now. Her cabinet features Holt McCallany and Nick Offerman, and Charles Pierce comes back from the last movie. I mean, there's just so many people in this thing, right? And there's also callbacks to, again, Mission Impossible 1. The William Donaloe character actually plays a major part in this movie. And yes, Shea Wiggum and Greg Tarzan Davis are still around from the last movie as well, as is Kittredge, who, of course, made his comeback in the last movie. There's a lot of people here, right? And, of course, there's also some other bad guys, like some Russians, unsurprisingly. And all that's to say, I still enjoy my time with the movie. Obviously, it's super long, convoluted stuff aside. It's still a lot of fun if you think about all the various set pieces. You know, again, I think that submarine sequence, which you knew was coming, of course, the Sevastopol wreck at the bottom of the Pacific that was doomed in the very beginning of Dead Reckoning, right? And I think they do a pretty good job of calling back to the plot that matters from the first movie. There's plenty of info dumps and exposition moments to catch you up to speed on what happened in the last movie, so that's not really a problem. But you knew he was going into that sub. And I think the way it goes is actually pretty cool, pretty creative, like I said. The high-flying biplane scene that you see in the trailer a lot, where him and Gabriel are flying the planes, shot in South Africa. I think, to me, that scene will most represent the viral stunt video that McQuarrie and Cruise made as a thank you to the success of Top Gun Maverick, several years ago at this point, where Cruise actually jumped out of the plane and did like a PSA thing while he was free falling, which, of course, reminds you how long ago this movie was first shot. Some of it shot with Dead Reckoning, and this movie was extensively strike delayed. That I think the overall, like, that plane sequence, obviously incredible stuff. Like, I think the technical craft that these movies have, it goes without saying at this point, just so impressive. And obviously no expense is spared. It's so obvious, right? But, like, I wonder if that set piece quite holds a candle to, like, the helicopter stuff with Cavill and Cruise in Fallout, for example, right? It's a bit of the same note. Or, in Rogue Nation, where Cruise is hanging on to the outside of a Boeing as it's taking off, right? Kind of similar types of things in a certain sense, right? I had just rewatched Dead Reckoning before this to kind of freshen up on the plot, but I mean, man, I think that's a movie that is such a darn blast the entire time. The globetrotting is great, but I think the sequences in that movie are awesome, and I'm super high on Dead Reckoning. And I think in contrast, the Final Reckoning, it just has a lot of like bad beats going on with it, where I think like the entity's progression of taking over the various nuclear arsenals across the globe, I feel like that stuff, like the first 30 so minutes or so of this movie, is pretty dark and pretty grim. And most of Mission Impossible is pretty light, even when there's big global threats that need to be saved by the IMF and by Ethan Hunt. No one else can do it, right? So I think you kind of have to be okay with that. And I mean, the crew really gets split up a lot in The Final Reckoning, which is not the best. I think like Haley Atwell's like thief qualities were so fun, and her chemistry with Cruise was so charming in the first movie, their first movie in Dead Reckoning, and you still get some of it, a good amount of it, in this movie. And I think, if anything, this movie is incredibly sentimental about the Ethan Hunt character and how much of a facsimile he is for Cruise himself. And obviously so much of Cruise is in this movie and what this movie is trying to say and storytelling. And I think the way it ends is unsurprisingly not nearly as dour and grim as the way the Daniel Craig era ended in James Bond, for example. And maybe to some that's a little hokey, but I kind of appreciate the charms that Cruise has always imbued in the character. And it did really feel like a satisfying send-off to me, where I think the movie is more successful as a franchise send-off than necessarily is as an individual mission movie. Like, again, I enjoyed my time with it, but I would rank this the worst of the Christopher McQuarrie movies, and by worst, I just mean the least good. I think Rogue Nation, Fallout, Dead Reckoning, they're just all way tighter and just work way better as movies, whereas the Final Reckoning just had so much on its plate that needed to resolve and progress, both meta-wise in terms of the Ethan Cruise character, but also just all this plot that kind of got introduced in Dead Reckoning and needed to be resolved. And I think that perhaps the biggest problem with all of that is that the Gabriel character just kind of stunk the entire time. No shot at Isai Morales, who plays Gabriel in both movies, but in the beginning, he's just kind of like an envoy for the entity, like the human face to the AI villain. I think that works fine, but he's always positioned as someone who's integral to Ethan's past and the cause of Ethan's decision to join the IMF back in the day, before the first movie, and none of that's explored at all, right? And then Gabriel being betrayed by the entity in the very beginning of the Final Reckoning, and then Gabriel kind of being rogue and like this scorned lover who needs to like take over everything for himself to get back at the entity. Like it's not that compelling. And Mission Impossible, again, hasn't had the best track record, but villains overall, you don't really watch these movies for the villains. But I do think the Gabriel aspect of stuff kind of holds both of these movies back to a certain extent. And because, again, the Final Reckoning has so much other stuff going on it needs to work on, the movie just isn't able to sing nearly as much as the way Dead Reckoning was. Where Dead Reckoning, there's just some dynamite-ass stuff in that, right? I think the handcuff Fiat car chase in Italy that Atwell and Cruz do is like instant classic stuff to me, right? And obviously everything Fallout, I mean, shit, that goes without saying. Fallout, what a 5-star banger that movie is, right? But yeah, I want this movie to do so well, and then I'm looking forward to seeing McQuarrie and Cruz do some other stuff for a while. I'm happy that Haley Atwell's profile has really been risen in recent years, between kind of getting a few extra bites of the apple on the Marvel side of things, and then really coming into her own as Grace in the two Mission movies. I want to see a lot from her moving forward. I think, Pom Klementieff, I think, showed a lot of fun stuff as Paris in these two Mission movies, right? She's just kind of the maniac, psycho, badass, killer. But it's very different from what she was doing as Mantis in the Guardians of the Galaxy film. So I think she kind of came out pretty well with this. Also, I have to shout out, of all the new characters in the Final Reckoning, and again, there are many, the best among them is clearly Tremel Tillman as the submarine captain that Ethan encounters. He actually makes a meaningful contribution to the story, and his performance style, kind of similar to what he does in Severance, in terms of his affectations and his gleeful positivity and energy with things. Some great line deliveries, get some of the best laughs in the whole movie. I thought Tillman was awesome in this, and it's a big W for him. I think between being one of the best performances on Severance and now doing something great once again in Mission, I think his stars, skyrocketing up for sure. But yeah, let me know, what did you think of Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning? Do you agree this movie had a lot of things kind of getting in the way of just being a good movie? On the other hand, are you still kind of satisfied with it as a send-off like I am? Were you entertained the whole time like me? Let me know what you thought. And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.